I'm going to go out on a limb and say I am fairly confident that you're familiar with the concept of digital smile design. Smile Cloud is the next evolution of that philosophy. It's a cloud-based design tool that utilizes AI for facial analysis and a library of real human teeth that are tailored to the actual person in front of us. Libraries that help us create treatment plans that are not only aesthetic, but functional. But this isn't just another software design. I know you're thinking, really? Another smile design software, another software demo. Smile Cloud is different. This is about rethinking how we treatment plan across disciplines, how we can make better decisions in regards to design, how we can communicate more clearly with our teams and with our labs, and how we can show patients what is not only just possible, but inspire them as to the direction that they're headed. This isn't just another smile design interface. It's not just a smarter algorithm. It's the next chapter in a journey that's been unfolding for decades. Because to really understand where this tool fits and why it matters, we need to look at how far smile design has come, because it's something that we take for granted on our day-to-day basis. Smile Cloud represents that chapter where we've transitioned historically from functional dentistry to then aesthetics, from digital planning, and now to this era of intelligent collaboration. Understanding that evolution helps us appreciate not only what this software can do, but what the actual problems are that it so elegantly solves. A wise philosopher once said, mastery begins with respect for the fundamentals. Without them, innovation is just improvisation. Yeah. And that philosopher may or may not have been ChatGPT 4.0, but it stands true. Fundamentals have been there from the beginning, and they've been there for a reason. So let me take you back to the origins of smile design, back to the 1930s, to the golden era of Hollywood film. Some of you may know who this is, and his namesake is still seen day to day on a makeup brand that you can find in your local drugstore. That man was Max Factor. Max Factor was a visionary in how he approached makeup. He was contracted by a number of different film studios, and he perfected the artistry of being able to create the illusion of perfection on the big screen. And to do this, he had to really assess and think about facial features. So he took this so seriously that he invented this interesting contraption, which assessed multiple different points of the face, the head, and in fact, points that we assess to this very day. He realized that he could manipulate the way the eye perceived the facial features, but the one thing that he couldn't change was the centerpiece of his masterpiece, the smile. Side note, I feel like people talk a lot of shit about dentists, but can we just take a moment to appreciate how horrifying this looks? She just looks like she's having the best time there. And so Max Factor reached out to one of his friends who just so happened to be a dentist in LA, and that dentist was Dr. Charlie Pincus, who is famously known for introducing the concept of Hollywood veneers. These Hollywood veneers were temporary bonded acrylic materials that were able to change the centerpiece that Max Factor was framing with his soft tissue artistry. And so you had these situations like the famed Shirley Temple, who was running around with the equivalent of what looks like today turkey teeth. And I never realized, but Dorothy's teeth in The Wizard of Oz are actually not her natural teeth. These are her real teeth. And they've really followed the rules of smile design that we use today. Smile arc, midline, buccal corridor, so many different features and factors, and designing that within the facial frame. Not to mention, she was hooked on methamphetamines that she'd been force fed essentially by the studios, and so that did not lend itself to a healthy teeth and gum situation. And this was the time in which the idea of the perfect smile was born into the consciousness of American society. We then move on past the 50s, the 70s, up until the 1980s and 90s, where the principles of smile design emerged and really began to crystallize in regards to the fundamentals. We had pioneers like Dr. Frank Spear, Dr. John Coys, and Pascal Meunier, who emphasized this facially driven treatment planning process. And I always have to sort of double check this, because the reality is these pioneers, these Goliaths, are still so relevant and making such an impact in our very day and era in this modern period of dentistry. But the reality is fundamentals remain for a reason, and these experts in that space continue to push what we can do with those fundamentals. They look at things like gingival architecture, facial midlines, facial thirds, contacts, embrasure percentages, emergence profile, red and gold proportions, incisal edge position, buccal corridor prominence. All things that we just sort of take for granted in this day and age.
Enter the 2000s, the birth of digital photography and 2D smile design. The widespread use of digital photography and the access to affordable cameras revolutionized the way that dentistry could be documented and recorded. This widespread use meant that patients were able to be photographed and you were able to check photos then and there rather than having to wait and see whether or not, after developing them, they were actually usable photographs. And only to realize that actually they weren't diagnostic, and wasting more time having to retake them. It was expensive as well to develop photos. This gave dentists the ability to have real-time feedback, and they were able to convert them into JPEG files and move them to computers so that they could communicate help them communicate visual treatment goals with patients and with labs. It sounds so simple, so duh. Like, of course they could use a JPEG. Then you could move it into a PowerPoint or a Keynote. But this was revolutionary. This was a quantum leap forwards in cosmetic aesthetic dentistry. And we were using softwares that weren't even designed for dental. We were able to be super resourceful and sort of MacGyver them into working for us based on the principles that we had. We were growing our understanding of the bigger picture of dentistry. We not just looked at the aesthetics and the analysis around that, but we came to really appreciate that nature has designed things in a way for a reason. And functionality and aesthetics actually really belong together, because ultimately, what is most functional actually typically tends to be the most aesthetic and beautiful. A good airway leads to a beautiful face, well proportioned, good jaw relationship. The perichromata and the texture on beautiful individualized teeth are what really enhances and translates veneers to be something that is no longer just looking man-made. You have the seeds of things like digital smile design with people like Christian Coachman who were traveling around the world and really developing their workflows in this analog digital hybrid where they would print off the digital photos and they would mark them up. And then from those markings, they would calibrate their calipers to figure out how much they needed to add in wax to their wax ups, translating that 2D design into a 3D object. And that was hard. That took a lot of artistry to be able to execute successfully. It was one thing for a lab to make veneers look amazing on the model, but if it didn't fit in context with the rest of the face, it could be a disaster.